Welcome back to the Sterling Hour. My guest tonight is a woman whose story seems ripped from the pages of a novel, a story of immense wealth, devastating loss, and the kind of profound betrayal that can only come from within one's own family. Her name is Chloe Sinclair. A little over a year ago, she was a struggling artist, living a quiet life, virtually unknown. Then, overnight, and she became the sole heir to an $87 million fortune. The media dubbed her the canvas heiress. But what the world saw as a fairy tale ending was, in reality, the beginning of a brutal war. Chloe was forced to confront the people she was raised to trust, to unearth secrets that had been buried for decades, and ultimately to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. Chloe, thank you for your courage in being here to share this story.
Thank you for having me. Diana, it's time the full story was told.
$87 million is a life-altering sum. But this story isn't really about the money, is it? It's about what the money revealed before we get to that fateful day in the lawyer's office. Take us back. Who was Chloe Sinclair before the inheritance?
It's strange. You ask who I was? And the first thing that comes to mind isn't a person, but a place, a feeling. Before the money, before the lawyers and the headlines, my world was measured in shades of ultramarine and burnt sienna. I was an artist. From the time I could hold a crayon. That's all I ever wanted to be. My universe was a small, rented loft south of Market Street in San Francisco. It was my sanctuary. A chaotic, beautiful mess that smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and the faint, metallic scent of possibility. The light from the single, massive industrial window was my clock. My life was a cycle of quiet observation, of trying to capture the way the fog draped itself over the Golden Gate Bridge, or the hidden histories in the lines around a stranger's eyes. It was a small life, a life that made perfect sense to me. But in the world I came from, it made no sense at all. You see, I was a Sinclair, and in San Francisco, that name is a brand. It means power, influence, and a very specific, ruthless kind of success. My father, Nathaniel Sinclair, is a senior partner at one of the city's most powerful corporate law firms. He's a brilliant, intimidating man who moves through the world as if he owns it. His voice a low baritone that doesn't ask. It commands. He didn't argue, he delivered verdicts. He didn't discuss, he dictated. His love always felt transactional. It was a commodity, awarded for achievements that enhanced the Sinclair family's prestigious brand. I remember when I had my first small gallery show, right out of art school. It was in a tiny space in the Mission District. But to me, it was the Met. I had poured my soul onto those canvases. I called my father, my voice trembling with excitement, and invited him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he said, "Chloe, sentiment is a liability. There is no return on investment in paint. Call me when you make partner." He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just speaking his native language. A language of profit and loss where my entire existence was filed under loss. My mother, Isabel, was the chief architect of our family's public image. Our Pacific Heights mansion, with its panoramic views of the bay, wasn't a home. It was a curated gallery of their success. A cold, silent museum. Every piece of furniture, every polished marble surface, was chosen to communicate effortless wealth and impeccable taste. She chaired galas, sat on the boards of the opera and the ballet, and cultivated a social circle that was both exclusive and utterly suffocating. She saw my art not as a passion, but as a social deficiency, a stain on the family's pristine reputation. I remember her walking through my studio once, her heels clicking on the concrete floor, a silk scarf held delicately over her nose, as if the smell of my work might infect her. "Darling, this is a lovely hobby," she'd said, gesturing vaguely at a piece I'd spent 6 months on. "But it's so messy. We really must focus on finding you a suitable husband. That is where a woman's true legacy lies. In a strategic alliance. An alliance? That's how she saw marriage. That's how she saw everything. And then there was my older brother, Julian. He was the golden son, the heir apparent. Everything I wasn't. He worked in investment banking, a world of high-stakes deals and billion-dollar mergers that my father considered a worthy extension of his own ambition. Julian was handsome, arrogant, and moved through life with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never been told no. His wife, Madison, a social media influencer whose life was a performance of curated perfection, was his ideal match. They were the Sinclair legacy personified, flawless, glittering, and entirely hollow. I was the anomaly in their perfect equation, the quiet, paint-stained daughter who didn't fit. My family's love for me felt like a form of damage control. They managed my quirks, tolerated my hobby, and patiently waited for me to grow out of it and join their world of cold, hard facts. Their dismissal wasn't loud or aggressive. It was worse. It was a quiet, constant erosion of my worth. Like the endless fog wearing away at a stone. I learned early on that to survive in their atmosphere, I had to make myself small, to fade into the background. I became the silent observer in the corner. Seen but rarely heard. A ghost in my own family. But I had a refuge. A place where my messy, emotional world of color wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. That place was with my grandparents, Arthur and Eleanor Peterson, my mother's parents. They lived 2 hours south, in a rambling cedar-shingled house perched on the cliffs of Carmel by the sea. Their home was the antithesis of my parents' mansion. It didn't have the silence of a museum. It had the sounds of a life being lived. It smelled of sea salt, the wood smoke from the stone fireplace, and my grandmother's sourdough bread cooling on the counter. It was filled with books stacked in every corner. Classical music drifting from an old record player. And the kind of deep, unconditional love that I craved like oxygen. Grandpa Arthur was a renowned architect. A man who built things that were meant to last: bridges, libraries, concert halls. He saw beauty in structure, in integrity, in things made with honesty and purpose. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who spoke with his hands as much as his voice. He was the one who built my first easel. He taught me about perspective, not just on the canvas, but in life. Creativity is the only honest currency. "Chloe, girl," he told me once, his hand smelling of graphite and sawdust as he helped me stretch a canvas. "It's the only thing you can make from nothing that has real value. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Grandma Eleanor was a botanist, a woman who understood that the most beautiful things required patience, care, and strong roots. Her garden was a wild, magnificent thing. Clinging to the cliffside, she would take me on walks along the bluffs, teaching me the names of the wildflowers that grew tenaciously in the rocky soil. "Some things look fragile," she said once, gently touching the petal of a vibrant, purple sea pink. But they have the strongest grip because they know where they belong. And they hold on. Never forget where you belong. Chloe. With them, I wasn't the Sinclair disappointment. I was just Chloe. They saw the world through my eyes. They championed my art, hanging my canvases in pride of place in their home. They believed in me with a ferocity that was the bedrock of my entire being. They were my roots. They were the place I belonged. The call came on a Tuesday morning. The rain had been relentless for days. A freak mudslide on Highway 1, just south of Bixby Bridge. Their car, they said it was instantaneous. The grief wasn't an emotion. It was a physical event. It was a thief that broke into my chest and stole the air from my lungs, leaving a cold, cavernous void. I felt like the world had been knocked off its axis. And I was in a terrifying freefall. My family, of course, handled the tragedy with impeccable, chilling efficiency. My mother organized a memorial service at Grace Cathedral that felt more like a corporate networking event than a farewell. My father delivered a eulogy that focused, with clinical precision, on my grandfather's shrewd real estate investments and valuable patent portfolio. Julian and Madison posted a tastefully filtered, black and white photo of the Carmel house on Instagram with the caption, "The End of an Era," honoring a legacy of greatness. Number legacy. It was all a performance. Another part of the Sinclair brand management. They were mourning the loss of a significant asset, not the loss of two extraordinary, loving people. A week later, a crisp, cream-colored letter arrived from an attorney in Monterey. A Mr. Elias Vance. He was the executor of my grandparents' estate, their oldest and dearest friend. A man I vaguely remembered from childhood holidays. He requested the presence of myself, my parents, and my brother for the reading of the will. I remember the drive down the coast, the gray Pacific churning beside us. My father was on the phone with his broker. His voice, a low, excited hum that made my skin crawl. Arthur was always cagey about his net worth. He was saying, but based on the Carmel property and his intellectual property rights, we're looking at a substantial liquidation. North of 80 million. Easily. This will finally give us the capital to launch the Sinclair Private Equity Fund. They weren't just planning my grandparents' financial future, they were erasing it, absorbing their lifetime of work into their own empire. I sat in the back of the car, clutching a worn leather satchel, feeling smaller and more invisible than ever. I assumed my role was what it had always been, to be a silent witness as the spoils were divided among the victors. I had no idea that my grandparents, from beyond the grave, had written a different ending. They had spent their lives teaching me about the importance of a strong foundation. I was about to find out they had built one for me. One forged in secrets and designed to withstand the hurricane that was about to break. As I walked into that hushed, wood-paneled office, I could feel the tectonic plates of my life beginning to shift. I thought I was there to witness the end of my grandparents' story. I was wrong. I was there for the beginning of mine. If you've ever felt like your voice was drowned out, if you've ever been told your passion was worthless, if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own family, then you need to hear what happened next. Make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell. Because the reading of that will wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was the declaration of a war I never knew I was meant to fight. The law offices of Mr. Elias Vance were located in a historic building in Monterey. The kind of place that felt steeped in integrity. The air smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and the salty Pacific breeze drifting through an open window. It was a world away from the cold, sterile glass and steel environment of my father's firm. Yet, as I sat there, the atmosphere was anything but calm. It was thick with a palpable predatory tension. I chose a small chair, set slightly apart from the main group, my default position in any family setting. My sketchbook and a charcoal pencil were in my hands. A nervous habit. A way to create a barrier between myself and the world. My family had arranged themselves around a large, mahogany boardroom table as if they were presiding over a corporate takeover. My father, Nathaniel, sat at the head, his expensive briefcase open, a gold pen resting beside a yellow legal pad. He was already making notes, delegating the future of my grandparents' legacy before it had even been granted to him. My mother, Isabel, sat to his right. A picture of composed, aristocratic grief. She was subtly inspecting the room's decor, her eyes cataloging the art on the walls, no doubt assessing its value. Across from them, Julian was scrolling through his phone, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He was texting his wife, Madison, who had declined to attend what she called a depressing formality, preferring instead to get a facial at a spa in Union Square. He was likely giving her a play-by-play. The victorious general reporting from the field. They weren't waiting for a will to be read. They were waiting for a transaction to be finalized. In their minds, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The vast Peterson estate would be absorbed into the Sinclair empire, a massive influx of capital to fuel my father's ambitions and my brother's career. I was merely a footnote, a minor dependent to be handled with a small, tidy trust fund enough to keep me from being an embarrassment, but not enough to give me any real freedom. The heavy oak door opened, and Mr. Elias Vance entered. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and distinguished, with kind eyes that held a hint of sorrow, but also an unmistakable glint of steel. He had been my grandparents' lawyer for over 40 years, but he was more than that. He was their friend, their confidant. He carried a single, thick, leather-bound portfolio. He nodded once to my parents and my brother, his expression unreadable. But when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something else, reassurance, perhaps, or a shared secret. He took his seat at the far end of the table and placed the portfolio before him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice a calm, steady baritone that instantly commanded the room. "We are here to execute the final will and testament of Arthur and Eleanor Peterson. I know this is a difficult time, and I will endeavor to make this process as straightforward as possible. Of course, Elias," my father said, his tone one of peer-to-peer authority, as if they were equals. Arthur was a practical man. He wouldn't have wanted a lot of sentimental nonsense. Let's get to the allocation of the primary assets. Julian and I have already outlined a preliminary strategy for rolling the estate into a new private equity fund. It's the most tax-efficient way to protect and grow the legacy. Indeed, my mother added, her voice smooth as silk. Arthur and Eleanor were always so proud of Nathaniel's business acumen. They would want him to manage things. She then glanced at me, a soft, pitying smile on her lips. "And of course, we'll ensure Chloe is provided for. A small annuity. Perhaps something to allow her to continue with her art." The condescension was so routine I barely felt the sting. Mr. Vance, however, seemed to notice. A muscle in his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. He opened the portfolio, clearing his throat. "Arthur and Eleanor were very clear in their instructions," he said, looking directly at my father. "They were, in fact, meticulous. They left very little to interpretation." He put on a pair of simple, black-framed reading glasses, and began, I, Arthur Peterson, being of sound mind and body. He read through the standard legal preamble, his voice a steady drone. My father tapped his gold pen on his legal pad, an impatient rhythm that filled the otherwise silent room. Tap, tap, tap. And now, regarding my bequests. Mr. Vance continued, to my daughter, Isabelle Sinclair. I leave the collection of first edition novels from my library, in the hope that she might rediscover the stories that shaped her mother's heart. My mother's smile tightened. It was a poetic gesture, but it was not a financial one. It was a message. To my son-in-law, Nathaniel Sinclair. Mr. Vance read, his eyes flicking up to meet my father's. I leave my collection of antique chess sets, and this piece of advice: a king is only powerful so long as he protects his queen and his castle. A king who sacrifices his own pieces for personal gain will inevitably find himself in checkmate. The tapping of my father's pen stopped. The room grew colder. This was not the language of a business document. This was a rebuke from the grave. To my grandson, Julien Sinclair, I leave my vintage Rolex watch, the one I received upon my graduation. It has always kept perfect time. May it serve as a reminder that integrity is timeless, and a man's character is measured not by the deals he makes, but by the promises he keeps. Julien looked down at his own, much flashier watch, a flush of anger creeping up his neck. He had been given a trinket and a lecture. The air in the room was now crackling with unspoken fury. They had been dismissed, honored, but dismissed. And now, Mr. Vance said, his voice lowering slightly, we come to the disposition of the remainder of the estate. He took a slow breath, as if bracing for an impact. This includes the primary residence and all surrounding land in Carmel by the sea, all stock portfolios, all investment accounts, all intellectual property rights and patents, and all liquid assets, the total value of which is estimated at $87 million. The number hung in the air. A stunning, glittering prize. My father leaned forward, his earlier annoyance forgotten, replaced by pure, uncut avarice. This was the real game. After much careful and prolonged consideration, Mr. Vance read, his voice resonating with the weight of my grandparents' final words. My beloved wife, Eleanor, and I bequeath our entire estate, in its totality, to the one person we trust to honor our true legacy, a legacy not of wealth, but of creativity, of integrity, and of a quiet strength that the world too often overlooks. Mr. Vance looked up from the document. He didn't look at my father, or my mother, or my brother. His kind, steady eyes found mine, and he gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. We bequeath all of it, every last dime, to our granddaughter, Chloe Sinclair. Silence. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the deafening, violent silence of a vacuum. The kind that precedes a massive explosion. The world seemed to slow. The motes of dust dancing in the sunbeam from the window frozen in midair. I saw my father's face, a mask of confident expectation, crumble. The color drained from it, leaving a waxy, grey pailleur. My mother's mouth fell open. A silent, ugly gasp. Her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. Across the table, Julian's phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the mahogany. The sound like a gunshot in the stillness. My father was the first to find his voice. It was a strangled whisper. What? Did you say? 87 million, Julian choked out. His voice a high, reedy squeak. I'd never heard from him before. To her, that's insane, it's a mistake. And then the bomb detonated. A mistake. My mother shrieked. Her voice a piercing, ugly thing that stripped away her decades of social polish. Elias. You've read it wrong. That's impossible. She can't be trusted with a credit card. Let alone an estate. The girl is a child. She spends her days playing with paint. She doesn't know the first thing about money or responsibility. My father shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He slammed both of his hands flat on the table, his entire body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. He wasn't looking at the lawyer anymore. His eyes, burning with a terrifying, hateful fire, were locked on me. What did you do? He roared, his voice bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. What lies did you feed those two old fools? You manipulated them. You twisted their minds against their own family, Mr. Vance's voice cut through the chaos, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Nathaniel, sit down. Your father-in-law was not a fool, and you know it. He held up a hand to forestall the coming tirade. Arthur and Eleanor were perfectly lucid when they signed this will. We have medical certifications from 3 different physicians, dated on the day of the signing. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final, crushing blow. And, knowing that you would likely react in this predictable manner, they also insisted on a final provision. We have a video recording of the entire proceeding, including their personal statements explaining their decision. The fight seemed to drain out of my father, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated hatred. All of it directed at me. He slowly sank back into his chair. I sat frozen in my own. My charcoal pencil clutched so tightly in my hand, I could feel the wood groaning. I had come into this room as a ghost, an afterthought, but my grandparents, with one final, extraordinary act of love and defiance, had just made me the most powerful person at the table, and in doing so, they had painted a target squarely on my back. The drive back to San Francisco was a 2-hour journey through a thick, suffocating fog of fury. The silence in my father's car was a living entity, a malevolent presence that pressed in on me from all sides. I sat in the back, staring out at the blurred landscape of the coastline, the beautiful, wild scenery my grandparents had loved. But I saw none of it. All I could see was the reflection of my father's eyes in the rearview mirror, burning with a cold, calculating rage. My mother sat in the passenger seat, rigid as a statue, her face a mask of bitter resentment. In the seat next to me, Julian was breathing heavily through his nose, radiating a hostile energy that felt like a physical heat. They weren't speaking, but a conversation was happening. A silent consensus was being formed. I was no longer just a disappointment. I was a traitor, an enemy who had stolen what was rightfully theirs. When we finally pulled into the heated garage beneath the Pacific Heights mansion, my father turned off the engine, and the heavy silence was finally broken. He turned around in his seat, his movements slow and deliberate, the movements of a predator cornering its prey. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "We are going to go upstairs," he said, not looking at me, but at a point somewhere over my shoulder, "and we are going to have a calm, rational discussion. This emotional outburst from your grandparents is unfortunate, a sign of their declining faculties, but it is a mistake that can be corrected." He finally met my eyes, and they were devoid of any warmth, any fatherly affection. They were the eyes of a lawyer assessing an opponent. Mr. Vance will be drawing up the necessary documents to transfer full administrative control of the estate's assets into a family trust. You will sign them. Chloe. This evening. This is not a negotiation. It is the only way forward. For 27 years. That tone of voice had been enough to make me fold. It was the voice of God in our household. The final, inassailable authority. I had been conditioned to obey it, to shrink from it, to do whatever was necessary to avoid its wrath. But something had shattered in me in that boardroom. The quiet, accommodating girl had been burned away by the heat of their hatred. What was left was someone else. Someone I was only just beginning to meet. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. From a long ago afternoon on the cliffs, some things look fragile, but they have the strongest grip. I took a breath that felt like my first real breath of air. I looked my father in the eye. No, I said. The word was quiet, but inside the confined space of the car, it landed with the force of a detonation. My father's carefully controlled facade cracked. What did you just say? He hissed. You heard me, I said, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. I said no. The will was very clear. Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor trusted me. Not you. Not Julian. Me. I am not signing anything. I don't know where the next words came from. They just emerged. Forged in a lifetime of quiet observation. I know why you want the money. Dad, I know the Sinclair private equity fund is just a fantasy. I know you need a bailout. A flicker of pure, animal panic flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by another wave of fury. He knew I had seen the worried late-night phone calls, the tense, whispered arguments with my mother about over-leveraging. He just never imagined I was smart enough to understand them. He got out of the car, slamming the door so hard the vehicle shook. Get out, he snarled. Now, I followed them into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought I could just go to my old room, pack my things, and find a way to leave. I had been naive. They followed me up the grand, sweeping staircase, their footsteps like thunder behind me. As I reached the third floor, where my small bedroom and adjoining art studio were tucked away, my father pushed past me. He didn't go to my bedroom. He strode directly to the door of my studio. You want to live in your little fantasy world. Chloe, he spat, his hand on the doorknob. You want to throw away your family for your hobby. Let's see how much your little paintings are worth now. He threw the door open and walked inside. My studio was my sacred space. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked against the walls. Jars filled with brushes stood like bouquets on my work tables. The air smelled of my life, of my soul. In the center of the room, on the main easel, was my most recent work. It was my largest and most ambitious painting yet. A portrait of my grandparents. I had been working on it for months, trying to capture the light in their eyes, the love that radiated from them. It was the only thing that had brought me any comfort since their death. My father walked up to it. He stared at the loving, painstakingly rendered faces of my grandparents for a long, silent moment. I saw his shoulders tense. Then, with a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage, he punched his fist straight through the center of the canvas. The sound of the tearing canvas was the sound of my heart ripping in two. I screamed, Arav. Wounded sound. He wasn't done. He grabbed the canvas with both hands and tore it from the easel. He ripped and tore. Again and again. the violent sounds echoing in the beautiful, sunlit room. He shredded their faces, their legacy, my love, until all that was left were limp, paint-smeared strips of linen hanging from the wooden stretcher. He stood there, breathing heavily, his knuckles bleeding, surrounded by the ruins of my work. "There," he said, his voice a ragged gasp. "That is what your art is worth. That is what you are worth. Nothing." Through a blur of tears, I turned and ran. I fled to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door, my body shaking with sobs. I had to get out. I had to call Mr. Vance. I fumbled in my bag for my phone, my hands shaking too much to even dial. But before I could, I heard a terrible, splintering crash. Julian had kicked in my bedroom door. It flew open. The lock shattered. The wood of the frame splintered. He stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. My mother right behind him, her arms crossed, her expression one of grim satisfaction. They didn't say a word. They began to empty my life into the hallway. They pulled my clothes from the closet, my books from the shelves, my personal journals from my desk drawer. They worked with a terrifying, methodical cruelty. I was paralyzed, watching them dismantle my existence. When they were done, Julian grabbed my suitcases and the trash bags they had filled with my belongings. "Get out of our house," my mother said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "But I have nowhere to go," I whispered, the words getting lost in my throat. "That sounds like a you problem." Julian sneered. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, and pulled me out of the room. He dragged me down the 3 flights of stairs, and to the front door. He threw my bags onto the perfectly manicured lawn. I stumbled out after them. The heavy, ornate front door of the mansion closed behind me. I stood there, on the cold stone steps. In shock, I looked down and saw my phone in my hand. I had managed to hold on to it. A lifeline. I frantically unlocked it, my fingers slipping on the screen. I had to find Mr. Vance's number, but then the door opened again. It was my father. He saw the phone in my hand, and a new, terrible look crossed his face. He strode down the steps towards me. "You will not be calling anyone," he said, his voice a low growl. He snatched the phone from my hand before I could react. I cried out, reaching for it. But he was too fast. He raised it high in the air, and then he threw it with all his strength down onto the stone walkway. It shattered, the screen exploding in a spiderweb of glass. It wasn't enough. He walked over to it and brought the heel of his expensive, polished shoe down on it. Once, twice, a third time, grinding the delicate electronics into dust and plastic. "Now you have nothing," he said, standing over the wreckage of my only connection to the outside world. "No family, no home, no phone. Let's see how the great artist survives now." He turned and walked back into the house without a backward glance. The deadbolt slid into place with a final, deafening click, and I was left alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the tattered remains of my life, with the cold San Francisco fog beginning to roll in from the bay. It was the end of everything, or so I thought. For how long I sat on that cold, damp curb, I don't know. Time seemed to dissolve into a gray, featureless haze of shock and grief. The sun began to set, and the famous San Francisco fog rolled in, blanketing the opulent mansions of Pacific Heights in a thick, ghostly shroud. The world became quiet, muffled. Cars passed, their headlights cutting brief, Hazy tunnels through the mist, their occupants oblivious to the small, broken figure sitting on the sidewalk. I was invisible again. But this time it wasn't a choice. I had been erased. The cold began to seep into my bones. A deep, gnawing chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My father's words echoed in the silence. Now you have nothing. He was right. I had no money. I knew he would have already frozen the small bank account he controlled. I had no friends in the city he hadn't vetted and approved. No one I could call who wouldn't immediately report back to him. And I had no phone. That single, violent act of destruction was the most calculatedly cruel of all. He hadn't just cut me off from my family. He had severed my connection to the entire world. He had turned me into a castaway on a deserted island, surrounded by the civilization I could no longer access. A wave of utter despair washed over me. So powerful, it almost made me physically sick. I thought about my grandparents. I thought about the fierce, protective love in their eyes. They had tried to give me a shield. And in the first real battle, it had been shattered. And I had been cast out. Maybe my family was right. Maybe I was too weak. Too naive. Too, artistic to handle the real world. The sobs started then. Not the loud, hysterical cries of my studio, but silent, racking shudders that shook my whole body. It was the quiet, hopeless weeping of someone who has truly given up. And then, through the fog of my misery, a memory sparked. It was small and faint, like a distant match being struck in a vast, dark cavern. Mr. Vance, standing in the doorway of his office after my family had stormed out. He had shaken my hand. His grip firm and reassuring. They will not take this well. Chloe, he had said. His kind eyes filled with a deep, knowing concern. Your father is a man who despises losing control. He had then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card. He hadn't just handed it to me. He'd turned it over, taken out a pen, and written something on the back. This is my private cell number, he'd said, his voice low and urgent. Not my office line. Mine. Program it into your phone right now. If you need anything, and I mean anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Don't hesitate. I had distractedly stuffed the card into the back pocket of my jeans. Under my jacket. My mind still reeling from the events in the boardroom. My jeans. I was still wearing them. My heart gave a painful, hopeful lurch. My phone was destroyed. My wallet was in my purse, which was lying on the grass 10 feet away. But the card, was it possible? My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled for my back pocket. I felt the smooth, crisp rectangle of cardstock. I pulled it out. Even in the dim twilight, I could see the elegant, embossed font Elias Vance. Attorney at law. I flipped it over, and there it was, written in a steady, confident hand. A phone number, a lifeline, but how to use it? The world without a cell phone felt alien, hostile. Then I remembered, on my long, sad walks through the city, I'd often noticed them, relics of a bygone era, standing like lonely sentinels on street corners. Payphones. There was one. I remembered, about 6 blocks down. Outside an old corner store, a new energy, born of desperation and a tiny flicker of hope, surged through me. I got to my feet, my body aching. I couldn't carry everything. I looked at the trash bags of clothes, the scattered books. They were just things. I grabbed the one thing that mattered, my leather satchel. which contained my sketchbooks. They were my memories. My work. My soul. I left the rest of it there on the lawn. A strange, sad offering to the gods of wealth and cruelty. I walked. The 6 blocks felt like a marathon. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The opulent, silent houses seemed to watch me, their windows like judging eyes. Finally, I saw it. Its small, interior light casting a sickly yellow glow in the gray mist. The payphone. I fumbled in my satchel for my wallet, praying I had some change. My fingers found 3 quarters, 75 cents. 1 call. I took a deep, shaky breath. The cold, damp air burning my lungs. I picked up the heavy, greasy receiver. It felt cold and alien against my ear. With a trembling finger, I dropped the quarters into the slot and dialed the number from the back of the card. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. It rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. Not a receptionist. Not a service. But the man himself, Vance. His voice was crisp, professional. Mr. Vance, I stammered. My own voice, a cracked, unrecognizable whisper. It's Chloe. Chloe Sinclair. There was a half-second of silence, and then the tone of his voice shifted completely. The calm professional was gone, replaced by a focused, urgent intensity. Chloe. Are you all right? Where are you? That's when the dam finally burst. The adrenaline, the shock, the sheer, overwhelming misery of the past few hours came pouring out in a torrent of ragged sobs. They threw me out. I cried, huddling against the cold, graffiti-scarred metal of the phone booth. He destroyed my painting. My grandparents, he tore it apart. He smashed my phone. Mr. Vance. He threw my things on the street. I have nothing. I'm at a payphone. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a silence so profound, so heavy. It felt like the world had stopped turning. When he spoke again, his voice was transformed. It was no longer kind or reassuring. It was a low, dangerous growl, the sound of a sleeping lion that had just been violently awakened. I anticipated he would be cruel, he said, his voice vibrating with a controlled fury. I did not anticipate he would be a monster. I was wrong. He was all business now. His voice, a weapon. Chloe, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Breathe. Just breathe. Tell me exactly where you are. What is the street intersection? What do you see? I'm on the corner of Presidio and Pacific. I gasped, trying to control my breathing. Outside a corner market. It's closed. Presidio and Pacific. I know exactly where that is, he said, his voice sharp and clear. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. Do not go anywhere. I am in my car right now. I am 15 minutes away. Do you understand me? Clue 15 minutes. Stay right there. I am coming to get you. The line clicked dead. I hung up the heavy receiver, my hand shaking so hard I could barely release it. 15 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Every pair of headlights that pierced the fog made my heart leap into my throat. A primal fear that it was my father, coming back to finish the job. Then, almost exactly 15 minutes later, a long, dark shadow emerged from the mist. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a police car. It was a car from another era. A vintage. Deep green Rolls-Royce. So quiet its engine was barely a whisper. It didn't just pull up to the curb. It materialized. A silent, graceful ghost of a machine. It was my grandfather's car. The back door opened, and Mr. Vance leaned out, his face, illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard, was set like granite. "Get in?" "Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I slid into the back seat, onto the soft, worn leather that still smelled faintly of my grandfather's pipe tobacco. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, shutting out the cold, the fog, and the entire hostile world. "Mr. Vance wrapped a thick cashmere blanket around my shoulders. "He made a grave error this evening." "Mr. Vance said, his eyes finding mine in the dim light. "He thinks he's left you with nothing. He has no idea that your grandparents left you with everything that truly matters." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the lonely payphone behind, and glided silently into the foggy night. "We're not going to a hotel, Chloe," he said, a grim, determined smile touching his lips as we headed south, towards the coast. "We're going home, to your fortress." The journey south in my grandfather's Rolls-Royce felt like a passage into another world. The car moved through the foggy night with a silent, comforting grace, a bubble of warmth and safety cutting through the darkness. The familiar scent of old leather and my grandfather's pipe tobacco was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't scared. The violent, chaotic energy of my family's mansion faded with every mile we drove, replaced by a growing sense of calm anticipation. I was clutching the leather folder Mr. Vance had given me, the one containing the deed to the Carmel house. It felt heavy in my lap, a tangible anchor in the storm of my life. The reality of my grandparents' foresight was beginning to sink in, and it was overwhelming. They hadn't just left me money. They had anticipated my father's cruelty, his greed, his desperation. They had known he would try to cast me out, and they had built me a sanctuary, a fortress, a place where he could not reach me. The depth of their love, their fierce, protective planning, brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. But these were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of profound, aching gratitude. "They knew," I whispered, my voice hoarse, as we drove down the dark, winding stretch of Highway 1. They knew he would do this. They knew the man he had become. "Chloe." "Mr. Vance said, his voice gentle but firm. He sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back to check on me. "Your grandfather was a brilliant architect. He understood structure, not just in buildings, but in people. He saw the rot in your father's foundation years ago. And your grandmother, Eleanor, had an intuition that was almost supernatural. She saw the storm clouds gathering long before anyone else." He paused, his gaze fixed on the dark, churning ocean to our right. "They didn't want their legacy, their life's work, their home, their values to be consumed by your father's darkness. They wanted it to be preserved, and they trusted you to be its keeper." We finally turned off the highway and onto the familiar, winding road that led to the estate. As we approached the main gates, I tensed, a residual fear flickering within me. But the gates were already open, illuminated by soft, welcoming lights. And standing just inside was a man in a professional black uniform. "Your grandfather arranged for a private security team 6 months ago," Mr. Vance explained, anticipating my question. They've been on retainer, managing the property's upkeep, waiting for my call. They have their instructions. No one gets onto this property without your express permission. Your father, your mother, your brother, they are not on the list. The car glided up the long, pine-lined driveway and came to a stop in front of the house. It was just as I remembered it. A beautiful, rambling structure of cedar and stone. Its large windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. It looked like it was breathing, waiting for me. I stepped out of the car, and the crisp, clean air filled my lungs, smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and the sea. I was home. Mr. Vance handed me a small, velvet box. Inside, on a bed of satin, was an old, ornate brass key. The key to the front door. Go on, he said softly. It's your house. My hand was shaking as I put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. And for the first time since the news of their death, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The house was warm, alive. The air smelled of beeswax, old books, and the faint, lingering scent of my grandmother's rose perfume. It was the scent of safety, the scent of love. This was the house where my grandparents had taught me to see the world, where they had nurtured my spirit and championed my dreams. This was the only place on earth where I had ever felt completely, unequivocally myself. I leaned my forehead against the cool, smooth wood of the doorframe and let out a long, shuddering breath, releasing the last of the tension and terror from my body. They saved me, I whispered to the quiet, familiar shadows. They're gone, but they still found a way to save me. They did more than that. Mr. Vance said from the doorway, they made sure you had the tools to save yourself. He gestured toward the library. My grandfather's favorite room. There's something in there for you. A letter. Your grandmother left it on the desk. My heart quickened. I walked into the library. The soft Persian rug muffling my footsteps. The room was just as he'd left it, with a half-finished chess game on the table by the fireplace and a stack of architecture journals on his large, oak desk. And sitting right in the center, propped up against a lamp, was a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Chloe, was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, flowing script. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal, which was stamped with the impression of a tiny, detailed seashell. Inside was a letter, written on her favorite linen paper. My dearest Chloe. I read aloud, my voice echoing in the silent, waiting room. If you are reading this, my love, then Arthur and I have moved on to our next great project. Do not mourn for us for too long. Our lives were full and blessed, most of all by you. Our only true sorrow was watching the son I raised become a man we no longer recognized. Tears blurred the words. I wiped them away with the back of my hand and continued. We have left you our fortune, my dear girl. But you must understand that the money is not the inheritance. It is a shield. A necessary, practical tool to protect you from the storm that we knew was coming. Your father and your brother have become hollow men, consumed by a hunger that can never be satisfied. They see our legacy as something to be liquidated, to be consumed. But you, Chloe, you always understood. Our true legacy is not in a bank account. It is in the integrity of a well-designed bridge, the tenacity of a wildflower on a cliff, The truth in a line drawn on a canvas. They will underestimate you. They always have. They will see a quiet, emotional girl, and they will think you are weak. They are fools. Your quietness is not weakness, it is observation. Your emotion is not fragility, it is the source of your art, your greatest strength. We have given you the shield of money, but we have also left you a sword, your real inheritance. My love, your weapon is hidden. To find it, you must solve a small puzzle. A collaboration between your grandfather and me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the final lines. Your grandfather? A man of logic and reason. Built the lock. A woman of poetry and nature. Designed the key. The answer lies in the place where his logic and my poetry have always met. The place we both believed held the truest view of the world. Where his logic and my poetry have always met. I looked around the library, my mind racing. The chest set the fireplace where they read poetry aloud. No. It felt more specific than that. I walked over to the massive, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. This was their favorite spot. My grandfather would sit in his leather armchair, studying the blueprints of a new project, marveling at the mathematical perfection of the waves. My grandmother would sit beside him, painting watercolors of the shifting colors of the sky, finding the poetry in the light. This was the place, the truest view of the world. I ran my fingers along the heavy, carved oak window frame. My grandfather, a man of logic, would have built something seamless, perfectly hidden. My fingers traced the intricate carvings of vines and leaves that my grandmother had designed. And then I felt it. A single, tiny leaf. No bigger than my thumbnail. That moved. It wasn't rigid like the others. It was a button. I pressed it. There was a soft, almost inaudible click. And a section of the bookshelf to the right of the window swung silently inward, revealing a hidden, walk-in vault. The air that wafted out was cool and dry, smelling of cedar and preservation. My grandfather hadn't just built a safe, he had built an archive. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or bars of gold. Instead, there were rows of meticulously organized, fireproof archival boxes. And in the center of the room, on a small, marble pedestal, was a single object, a beautiful, hand-carved wooden box. I walked towards it, my footsteps echoing in the small, secret room. This was it. This was the sword. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that once I opened this box, my life would never, ever be the same. The secret room was my grandfather's masterpiece of logic and my grandmother's testament to poetry. The vault itself was a marvel of engineering, cool and silent, the air perfectly climate-controlled. But the contents I was about to discover were a catalog of pure, unfiltered human chaos. The wooden box on the pedestal was intricately carved with images of the wildflowers my grandmother loved: sea pinks, lupine, poppies. It felt warm and familiar to the touch, a stark contrast to the cold dread that was beginning to pool in my stomach. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark green velvet, were two items. The first was a set of two thick, leather-bound journals, the kind my grandfather used for his architectural sketches. They were unlabeled. The second was a single, elegant silver fountain pen, resting in a custom-made indentation. It was beautiful, but it seemed an odd thing to lock away in a high-security vault. I picked up the top journal. its leather cover worn and soft. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was my grandfather's. His familiar, precise architectural script. The first entry was dated nearly 20 years ago. Nathaniel came to me today. It began. He needs a short-term loan. $50,000. He says it's a bridge loan for a real estate deal. A sure thing. There was something in his eyes I did not like. A desperation that he tried to mask with arrogance. Eleanor feels it too. But he is my daughter's husband. I will give him the money. I will. However, be documenting this. A man's ledger tells the true story of his life. I sank down onto the small stool in the vault. My legs suddenly weak. I began to read. Page after page. Year after year. My grandfather had meticulously documented a hidden history of my family. It was a secret ledger. Not of his own finances, but of my father's. The short-term loans that were never repaid. The can't-miss investments that vanished into thin air. He had copies of bank statements. Promissory notes that were never honored. And annotations in the margins. Written in his steady, analytical hand. Nathaniel claims this loss was due to a market downturn. My own analysis shows it was due to gross incompetence and high-risk gambling on futures. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. My father hadn't just been a bad businessman. He had been systematically siphoning money from my grandparents for 2 decades. Using their love for my mother as leverage, he had funded his lavish lifestyle. His mansion. His country club memberships. Not on the success of his law firm, but on the quiet, undocumented generosity of the man he publicly dismissed as being out of touch. The total was staggering. Well into the millions. This journal was an airtight case of financial abuse and deceit. It was a shield. Just as my grandmother's letter had said. It was the proof I needed to defend the will against any claim that they were senile or that I had manipulated them. This showed a clear, long-standing pattern of my father's untrustworthiness. But there was a second journal. I picked it up with a sense of foreboding. The first had been about money. I had a sickening feeling this one would be about something far worse. I opened it. The handwriting was the same. But the tone was different. It was darker, filled with a sense of personal pain and disillusionment. The first entry was dated 30 years ago. Shortly after my parents were married, I introduced Nathaniel to Robert Hemmings today. It read, "Robert has been my dearest friend since college. He is the most brilliant and ethical corporate lawyer I have ever known. He has just started his own firm. Nathaniel is young, ambitious, and needs a mentor. Robert is the best of men. He will guide him well." I continued to read, my blood running cold. The journal told a story, a slow, creeping tragedy that unfolded over a decade. It detailed how my father, Nathaniel Sinclair, had built his entire career on a foundation of betrayal. He had joined Robert Hemmings' small, idealistic firm as a junior partner. He had used Robert's connections, learned from his strategies, and earned his complete trust. Then, slowly and methodically, he had dismantled the man's life. He poached his biggest clients with under-the-table deals. He spread subtle, poisonous rumors about Robert's competence. The final act was a brutal masterpiece of corporate treachery. He orchestrated a hostile takeover of the firm. Using a legal loophole he had discovered while working for Robert, and forced his own mentor, his friend, the man who had given him everything, out of his own company. The firm Sinclair, Hemmings and Associates, quietly became Sinclair and Associates, Robert Hemmings. A man my grandfather described as having more integrity in his little finger than my father had in his entire body, was left financially and professionally ruined. He had died of a heart attack less than a year later. A broken man. This wasn't just about money. This was about character. This was the dark, rotten secret at the core of the Sinclair family's success. It was a story of a sociopathic level of ambition, of a man who would destroy anyone to get what he wanted. My grandfather had documented it all, not just with his own words, but with copies of letters, partnership agreements, and a final, heartbreaking note from Robert Hemming's widow. He had kept this secret for decades, perhaps to protect my mother from the truth of the kind of man she had married. He had kept this poison locked away, and now he had given it to me. But why the first journal was a shield? What was this? I looked back at the velvet-lined box. All that was left was the fountain pen. It was a beautiful silver pen, cool and heavy in my hand. It looked completely normal. I thought back to my grandmother's letter. Your grandfather, a man of logic, built the lock. I, a woman of poetry, designed the key. The vault was the lock. What was the key? The pen felt too significant to be just a pen. It was the sword. On instinct, I tried to unscrew the cap, but it wouldn't budge. I twisted the body of the pen itself. It unscrewed with a soft, mechanical click, but not to reveal an ink cartridge. It revealed a tiny, almost invisibly USB port. It was a key, a modern key, hidden inside a putik, old-world object. My grandmother, it had to be her contribution. My mind was reeling. I suddenly felt an urgent, desperate need to know what was on that drive. I left the vault and went back into the library, my hands shaking. I sat down at my grandfather's large, antique desk. On it was his laptop, a sleek, modern machine that seemed at odds with the old-world charm of the room. I plugged the pen's USB into the port. A new drive appeared on the screen. It was titled, simply, For Chloe. I clicked it open. There was only one file inside. It was an audio file, labeled NS, JS, private, call, recording. NS, Nathaniel Sinclair. JS, Julian Sinclair. My breath caught in my throat. My grandfather, the logical man of structure, had collected the documents. My grandmother, the quiet observer of nature, had apparently been collecting conversations. I put on the headphones that were sitting next to the laptop and pressed play. The sound was crystal clear. It was a phone conversation, and it had been recorded just 2 weeks before my grandparents' death. It was Julian's voice first. Slick and arrogant. The deal is about to close. Dad, but we have a cash flow problem. A big one. The investors are getting nervous. We need a capital injection of at least $3 million. And we need it by the end of the month. Then my father's voice. A low, frustrated growl. The old man has tightened the purse strings. He and his little pet, Chloe, have been going over the trust documents. He's asking questions. We can't get another dime out of him legally. There was a pause. Then Julian's voice dropped, becoming low and conspiratorial. So, we do it illegally? My father's voice. What are you suggesting, Julian? His health is failing. Eleanor's is too. That stretch of Highway 1 is treacherous in the rain. One little accident. One less obstacle. The estate settles. The money flows to Mom, which means it flows to us. The problem is solved. Permanently. The world stopped. The air left my lungs. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about cruelty. They had been talking about killing them. My grandfather hadn't just left me a shield to defend his will. He had left me a sword. And he had just shown me exactly who I needed to use it on. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark library. The headphones silent. The chilling conversation still echoing in the void of my mind. The world had tilted on its axis. This was no longer a family dispute over an inheritance. This was something monstrous. My brother's words, one little accident, one less obstacle played on a loop. A venomous whisper that coiled around my heart. Their death hadn't been a tragic accident. It had been an opportunity they were waiting for. Perhaps even hoping for. The mudslide had simply done the job for them. The shock was a physical thing. A cold, heavy weight in my limbs. But underneath it, something else was beginning to form. A core of anger so pure and so hot it burned away the last vestiges of the timid, accommodating girl I used to be. The grief for my grandparents was still there. A deep, aching wound. But now it was intertwined with a cold, clear resolve. They had tried to protect me. Now, it was my turn to protect them. To protect their legacy from the ghouls who bore their own family name. I didn't sleep. I spent the night in that library. The command center my grandparents had built for me. With Mr. Vance on speakerphone. We planned. We strategized. He was horrified by the audio file. His professional calm shattered by a raw, personal fury. He had loved Arthur and Eleanor. He wanted to call the district attorney immediately. But I stopped him. No, I said, my voice hard and steady. Not yet. A recording of a conversation isn't enough to prove murder. They'll call it a deep fake. They'll say I manufactured it. They will drag my grandparents' names through the mud to save themselves. We have to be smarter. We have to dismantle them. Piece by piece. Until they have nothing left to hide behind. The sun rose, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and gold. But I felt no warmth. I sat at the security console. A bank of high-definition monitors showing every angle of the property. And I waited. I was no longer the prey. I was the spider. Sitting in the center of a web they had no idea they were about to walk into. At 8:59 a.m., precisely on time, they arrived. It was a convoy of breathtaking arrogance. My father's black Mercedes led the way, gleaming like a hearse. Behind it was a pristine white Range Rover belonging to a woman I recognized from society pages as the top real estate broker in Northern California. And bringing up the rear was a white, windowless van with Monterey Lock and Key printed on the side. My family, so certain of their victory, had brought in their entire army to witness my surrender. My father emerged from his car, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. The very image of power and control. My mother got out, her face a mask of triumphant disdain, shielded by sunglasses that were unnecessarily large for the overcast morning. Julian and Madison spilled out of the back seat, Madison already filming with her phone. A smug, predatory grin on her face. No doubt narrating the downfall of her troubled sister-in-law for her online followers. Two burly men in work shirts got out of the van, carrying a heavy toolbox and a long, thick metal crowbar. My father strode to the intercom at the massive iron gates as if he owned the place. He pressed the buzzer. A long, impatient blast of sound that echoed in the quiet morning. I watched him on the screen, sipping a cup of black coffee, my hand perfectly steady. He pressed it again, and then again. A frown of confusion creased his brow. This was not part of his plan. He turned and gave a curt nod to the locksmiths. "Open it." The two men approached the gates, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. One of them inspected the complex. High security lock. Boss?" He called back to my father, his voice tinny through the security speaker. "This isn't a standard lock. This is a custom job. High end. We can't just pick this. We might have to cut through it." My father's face darkened with impatience. This was my cue. I stood up, walked out of the library, through the grand foyer, and up the wide, curving staircase. At the top, double doors led out onto a massive, stone-covered second-floor balcony that overlooked the front entrance. It was a stage, and the performance was about to begin. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool, salt-tinged air. I was wearing a simple pair of jeans and a black cashmere sweater. My grandmother's favorite. I leaned against the stone balustrade, my coffee cup cradled in my hands, and looked down at them. My mother saw me first. Her mouth fell open. The look of smug victory on her face curdled into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a shrill, cracking sound that shattered the morning's peace. "What are you doing in my parents' house?" "You ungrateful little witch, get out of this house." Every head snapped up. The locksmiths froze. The real estate broker's professional smile vanished. Julian and Madison stared, their faces a perfect portrait of shock and incandescent rage. My father recovered first. He pointed a thick, furious finger up at me. "She's trespassing," he yelled, his voice booming across the manicured lawn. He was performing for the broker and the locksmiths. "That is my daughter. She is mentally unstable and has been written out of the family. She broke into the property last night." He waved an imperious hand at the gate. "Don't just stand there. I am the executor of this estate. I am hiring you to open this gate. Break it down if you have to. I'll pay you 5 times your normal rate." The locksmiths exchanged a nervous glance. This was clearly more than they had signed up for. "That's right," Madison screamed, her phone aimed directly at my face, her hand shaking with a combination of excitement and fury. "We're live streaming this. Chloe, everyone is going to see you for the psycho you are, the crazy, pathetic heiress having a breakdown and squatting in her dead grandparents' home. You are finished." Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic imitation of our father. "It's over. Chloe, you really thought this would work. You're just a stupid artist who got lucky for a minute. We're having you arrested for trespassing. And then we're having you committed. We," he gestured to his father, "will finally take control of the assets, as we were always meant to." "Sir?" one of the locksmiths said hesitantly to my father. "If there's a person inside claiming residence, it becomes a domestic dispute. We can't legally force entry without a court order." "I am the court order," my father roared, his face turning a dark, blotchy crimson. "I am paying you. Do your damn job, or I will sue your company into a smoking crater." The two men flinched. One of them sighed, a look of resignation on his face. They turned back to the gate. The man with the crowbar positioned it at the lock mechanism, preparing to use brute force. I just stood there. I watched them. I said nothing. I took another slow, calm sip of my hot coffee. They looked so small from up here, so frantic and powerless, scrabbling at the edges of my world. The man with the crowbar wedged it into place. The screech of metal on metal was a horrible, jarring sound. I lowered my coffee cup. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it carried in the cool morning air with an authority that stunned even me. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The man with the crowbar paused. Looking up, my father let out a harsh bark of a laugh. You wouldn't, he mocked, his voice dripping with venom. And who's going to stop us, you, a pathetic little girl in a sweater who is going to stop me? Chloe, you. And what army? And right on cue? As if summoned by the gods of dramatic irony, the heavy oak door behind me clicked open. A deep, commanding voice cut through the air. A voice that vibrated with power and ice-cold authority. I believe that would be me. Nathaniel. I didn't turn. I had been waiting for him. Mr. Elias Vance stepped out onto the balcony to stand beside me. He was the very picture of quiet, deadly force. Dressed in a flawless, dark gray suit. A thin leather briefcase in one hand. He looked down at my father, not with anger, but with an expression of complete and utter disdain. Like a man observing a particularly unpleasant insect. The reaction from the ground was instantaneous and glorious. It was as if someone had hit a pause button on their entire world. My father's mocking laugh died in his throat, his mouth snapping shut. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty sickly gray. Elias, he whispered. His voice no longer a roar, but the pathetic squeak of a mouse. What the hell are you doing here? My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her pearls. Madison stopped her live stream, her phone wavering in her hand as she stared, her jaw slack. The vicious, taunting smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, dumbfounded confusion. The real estate broker's eyes widened in alarm. She recognized Elias Vance. Everyone in their world did. Mr. Vance ignored them all. He looked down, his gaze finding my father like a sniper, finding his target. Nathaniel, he said, and his voice wasn't a shout, but it carried to every corner of the property with absolute authority. I am here in my capacity as legal counsel for my client. Ms. Chloe Sinclair. He placed a proprietary hand on my shoulder. A clear and public declaration of alliance. The sole, legal, and undisputed owner of this property. My father flinched but tried to rally, puffing out his chest. Your client, she's my daughter. This is my parents-in-law's house. It's part of the estate. And I am the executor, Mr. Vance just stared at him, letting the frantic, pathetic words hang in the air for a long, humiliating second. Then, he delivered the killing blow. The estate, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, is irrelevant, because this house, Nathaniel, is not, and has never been, us a part of it. He placed his briefcase on the stone railing, clicking it open. He pulled out a thick, ribboned legal document. This, he said, holding it up so they could all see the official seals of the state of California, is a fully executed, notarized, and recorded quitclaim deed. 1 year ago, Arthur and Eleanor Peterson, being of sound mind and body, legally transferred 100%, unencumbered ownership of this property to Miss Chloe Sinclair. He let his gaze travel from Nathaniel to Isabel to Julian. She, Mr. Vance declared, his voice rising, is the owner of this land, this house, and everything in it, which means, he said, his eyes narrowing as he pointed a damning finger down at my father, that you are trespassing. The word hit my father like a physical blow. But Mr. Vance wasn't finished. The siege at my gates was over. The demolition of their world had just begun. The word trespassing echoed in the stunned silence. A legal term that was also a profound moral judgment. My father, a man who had built his entire identity on the foundations of law and ownership, had just been publicly branded an intruder. He staggered back a step, his face a mask of disbelief. The real estate broker, a woman whose entire career depended on reputation, took a decisive step away from my family. Her expression, one of utter horror. She was extricating herself from the blast radius. But Mr. Vance wasn't looking at her. He had turned his ice-cold attention to the two locksmiths who stood frozen by the gate, the crowbar lying on the ground between them like a fallen sword. "Gentlemen," Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level that was far more terrifying than my father's shouting, as I'm sure you are now aware. "You have been hired under false pretenses. You are currently accessories to attempted breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and conspiracy to intimidate the legal owner of this property. My associate has already recorded your business name, your license plate, and high-resolution images of your faces." He leaned forward slightly. "A predator about to strike. I am Elias Vance. If you are not in your van and off this street in the next 30 seconds, I will not only ensure you are both arrested, but I will also file a civil suit against your company that will bankrupt you before the end of the fiscal year. I will personally see to it that you never work in this county again." Am I making myself clear? The reaction was immediate. The larger of the two men didn't even speak. He just grabbed his toolbox and practically ran back to the van. The other one stammered, "We didn't know. Sir, we swear." We had no idea. He said it was his house. He snatched up the crowbar and scrambled after his partner. They threw themselves into the van, the engine roaring to life. The vehicle tore away from the curb, leaving a screech of rubber on the pristine asphalt of the quiet street. Mr. Vance then turned his gaze to the real estate broker. "Ms. Albright," he said, his tone now one of weary disappointment. "I have your card. You can expect a call from my office this afternoon. We will be discussing your firm's due diligence policies and your personal liability in this matter. I suggest you retain counsel. Now, please leave." The woman turned pale. Without another word, without even a glance at my father, she scurried to her Range Rover and sped away, leaving my family utterly alone, abandoned by their hired help, exposed and humiliated on a public street. And then, as if on cue, a final, beautiful piece of my grandparents' planning rolled silently into view. Two Monterey County Sheriff's Department cruisers, their lights silently flashing, pulled up and parked directly behind my father's Mercedes, blocking him in completely. The curtains in the neighboring houses were definitely twitching now. Two deputies got out, their expressions calm and professional. Mr. Vance simply raised a hand in greeting from the balcony. "Good morning, officers," he called out, his voice perfectly pleasant. "Thank you for the prompt response. I believe the individuals who were causing the disturbance were just leaving." "Disturbance," one of the deputies called back, his hand resting on his belt as he looked from Mr. Vance to my father, his eyes taking in the whole bizarre scene. My mother looked like she was about to faint. This was her ultimate nightmare. A public spectacle. The involvement of the police, the shame of it was a physical blow. Madison had finally, blessedly, put her phone away. Her face, a mask of horrified disbelief. This was not the kind of content her followers appreciated. My father stood there, trembling, a cornered animal, the police behind him, the lawyer he couldn't beat in front of him, and me, his invisible daughter, standing above him, holding all the power he had lost, and he had lost publicly. He looked up at me, his face a grotesque canvas of purple rage and absolute impotence. He couldn't scream. He couldn't command. He couldn't hit. All his weapons had been taken from him, so he just pointed, his finger shaking violently, aimed straight at my heart. "You," he seethed, his voice a low, venomous hiss that barely carried. "You think you're clever? You think you've won? This is not over. Chloe, I promise you, this is not over." It was the pathetic, empty threat of a king who had just been dethroned. I looked down at him, at the man who had terrorized me my entire life, who had destroyed my art, who had shattered my phone, and I felt nothing. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a cold, quiet emptiness where my love for him used to be. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool stone of my balustrade, of my house. "Oh, I know it's not over. Father," I said, and my voice, clear and cold, carried across the perfectly manicured lawn. "We haven't even started to discuss the fraudulent loans, the embezzlement, or Robert Hemmings yet." I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. I saw the terror. He had no idea how much I knew. But the name Robert Hemmings was a ghost from a past he thought was long buried. It was a direct hit. The deputy took a step toward him. "Sir, is there a problem here? We received a call about a potential trespass situation." That was the final indignity. The law, his law, was being turned against him. He let out a strangled, animal sound of pure frustration. I spun around, yanked on his suit jacket, and stormed back to his Mercedes. "Isabelle and Julian, get in the car." Now my family didn't walk. They scrambled. They practically fell over each other to get into the car, their heads bowed in shame. My father peeled out of the driveway, humiliated, defeated, with 2 sheriff's deputies watching him go. The street was quiet again. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding, my body trembling as the adrenaline began to recede. "Mr." Vance turned to me, a look of profound, grim satisfaction on his face. He closed his briefcase. "That," he said, "was the public containment. The foundation has been secured." He looked back into the library, where the journals and the pen sat waiting on the desk. "Now," he said, a predatory smile touching his lips, "it's time for the demolition." We went back inside, the heavy doors closing, shutting out the world. I felt a strange sense of dislocation. He called me a pathetic little girl. I whispered, looking down at my hands. "He is a fool." "Mister," Vance said, walking past me into the library, "he has no idea that you are the most dangerous person he has ever met. Because you hold the one thing he has spent his entire life trying to destroy, the truth." I followed him into my grandfather's office. The room felt different now. No longer a sanctuary, but a command center. A war room. I sat in the large leather chair behind the desk. It felt like it finally fit me. "Mister?" Vance stood in front of the desk. All business. What he just experienced, he said, was humiliation. What comes next must be annihilation. Not for revenge, Chloe, but for justice, for Arthur, for Eleanor, and for Robert Hemmings. He pulled out his phone. "With the evidence you have?" I can call the district attorney and the state bar association right now. He'll be disbarred and in prison within a year. His thumb hovered over the screen, but I held up my hand. No, I said. A new, cold clarity settling over me. That's your way. The legal way. It's clean. It's efficient. But it's not my way. If we do that, he becomes a headline. A statistic. He will spin a story. Hire a team of lawyers to muddy the waters. He will never have to face me. I looked at Mr. Vance, my eyes boring into his. He built his kingdom on lies and intimidation. I'm not going to let the state tear it down. I'm going to make him hand me the crown himself. A slow, dangerous understanding dawned on Mr. Vance's face. What are you proposing? He's a cornered animal, I said. And right now, he's not just humiliated. He's terrified. He just lost a battle he thought he couldn't lose. And he has no idea how.